Well, in the beginning, Māori married off their women to Pākehā men because these Pākehā men had skills and knowledge that we wanted. So we gave them our taonga, our woman. But eventually, we all fell in love.
Yes, well, that was all very fine for the men, of course. Pākehā men marrying Māori women became very acceptable, but a Pākehā woman marrying a Māori man, that was very much looked down upon until very recent years.
E tare ana te ngākau I nā te aroha. Te tirohanga iho taku tonga rerewa. E moto e kahurangi noroto I te kopa.
For more than 200 years, Aotearoa, New Zealand has been deeply influenced by the joining of men and women across a cultural divide. In their earliest contact with outsiders, Māori favoured intermarriage. Māori women were offered as sexual partners and wives to the whalers and traders who stopped off in coastal settlements around the country. Māori wanted to acquire Pākehā know-how and technology, and intermarriage was encouraged by some colonists like Governor Grey as a way of bringing Māori into the structures of British values and society. In the Hokianga in the early 1860s, when Clendon House was built, all but one of the Pākehā men in the area had Māori wives. In fact, very few Pākehā women had arrived in New Zealand. Lindsay Charman Love looks after the historic house and has studied the lives of the bicultural couple who lived here. James Clendon was a British trader and shipowner who became a member of New Zealand's first Legislative Council. His wife, Jane Cochrane, was the well-educated daughter of an Irish father and Māori mother.
It's a classic example of an early Pākehā marriage. Jane was a young woman, Clendon was an experienced, practiced statesman within New Zealand politics. They got married in 1855. There was a cloud of family anxiety over the event, but it was a respectable marriage. The first child was a year after they became married.
The couple were bilingual, but their 8 children chose to live in one culture or the other.
The Clendon family looks like the girls were quite happy to be seen as Pākehā and to live their lives out. But the oldest son, George Clendon, he became a carpenter and a justice of the peace and many things Pākehā. But amongst local Māori, he was regarded as rangatira. One of the other sons was famous for his oratory, his skill in a waka. So he's obviously taken the korowai from his mother's side and been very proud to wear it.
While intermarriage with northern tribes was significant, the impact was much greater over a shorter period in the South Island because the tribal group was smaller and wanted to increase its influence.
We got the height of shore whaling in the 1830s at a time when Ngāi Tahu had suffered intertribal conflict with northern tribes, but also interhapu conflict as well. So there was a loss of population at some level, so needing to replace the population was really important, and allowing these men in to do that was one way in which to solve that problem. The others is its access to new resources and knowledge, in which many other Māori communities were involved in at this time.
Angela Wanhala chose intermarriage as the topic for her doctorate because she and her father descend from those early mixed heritage Ngāi Tahu families.
So this was a real opportunity for him to learn a bit more and for me to learn a hell of a lot more about the kind of community in which my family lived in, and also the kind of experiences they had in the 19th and early 20th century being part of interracial couples and also being of mixed descent. And so a lot of the people I interviewed are of a generation of where their parents, and the people I interviewed are people who are in their 60s and 70s, of a generation where their parents tried to pass but didn't talk about their ancestry to their children. And so these people grew up not knowing that they were Ngāi Tahu, and so are now trying to attempt to recover those cultural links today.
Despite the huge impact of intermarriage in Ngāi Tahu in the early 1800s, it was confined to just a few decades.
in Dad's family. Dad was about three-quarter caste Māori, but the only European blood in Dad's lineage took place in marriages before 1840. And that was to do with the very early settlement patterns here in the South Island.
By the middle of the 19th century, European women were arriving to settle here, and European men became less interested in Māori wives. Meanwhile, the children of the bicultural marriages began marrying each other.
So you ended up with very strong half-caste communities that were equally proud of the fact that they were Edmonds from Wales or Robertsons from Scotland or Coopers or Stirlings or Palmers or all these different names which are still quite dominant in southern Māori whakapapa.
Canon Hone Carr says the pattern was similar on the East Coast. As a churchman himself, he believes the early missionaries probably weren't keen on mixed marriages, but with so many single European men around in the early days, such unions were inevitable.
Welcome to you all to our karakia this morning. Taking Aotearoa, for instance, my great-grandfather was a Yorkshireman, and he was part of the British militia that came here. And you get names like Goldsmith, American Jews who marry into Ngāti Porou, Collier, another American Jew, marries into Ngāti Porou, and Fox, Clark, Reed. These were all Pākehā families who married into Ngāti Porou. And then you get McClutchy. They were Pākehā names. Māori readily accepted them as part of the community.
Hone says many Ngāti Porou have forgotten that there are so many Pākehā in their whakapapa, and he remembers people of mixed ancestry being teased about it.
In Rangitukia, the children of those issue were known as Tinimiti or Utupihigete. And one of the kaumatua, Rukuata, used to have fun with my grandfather. Whenever my grandfather stood up to speak, he'd carry a tin of bully beef in his pocket and he'd take it out and he'd roll it across the floor towards my grandfather and the Colliers and the Goldsmiths who were all seated on the other side of the hall, the Foxes and the Clarks. And they all knew what it was. They just ignored it and just carried on talking.
In her research with Ngāi Tahu families, Angela Wanhala heard constantly about the shame they suffered.
Trying to hide their ancestry, of trying to pass as Pākehā, trying to pass as white, that it was shameful to be of mixed descent because you were a half-caste, you were a mongrel breed, you didn't fit into any part of society, you weren't European or you weren't Māori, and it was very difficult to be accepted in either.
The Māori Pākehā parents of John Tamihere were part of a new wave of intermarriage in New Zealand, which took off after the Second World War. And difficulties continued for mixed families.
Mum and Dad didn't appreciate that there were huge culture clashes going on all the time. And so us kids growing up in a bicultural relationship like that, you could get mixed up, I reckon. You could take, the wrong sense of things. But anyway, by and large, the thing that saved our family, I think, was the old Catholic faith, because it was the old mortar that held everything together, from our schooling through to another value system. It was Mum's value system, but it was the value system that Dad adhered to, because a lot of it was close to his ringatu upbringing and all that stuff. So that was the thing, I think, that brought us together, which was the religion brought us together rather than the sort of European Māori side of things.
My parents were very shocked when I told them that I was going to marry Māori. They didn't come to our wedding, of course. My mother felt that I was throwing myself away, and my father was concerned about having half-caste children.
For my father, he was concerned about our whakapapa. He thought that Gwenda was not bringing any improvement to our whakapapa. She was weakening the bloodlines.
St Mary's Church in Māngere is a modern gathering of mixed heritage people who place special importance on Māori culture and language. For Canon Hone Ka, his church vocation embraces his bicultural whānau.
My wife is Pākehā, and many of our congregation actually have Pākehā grandparents. And some have Pākehā father, and though those people have passed on, the children still belong here and are much more strongly oriented to their Māori side than they are to their Pākehā side, because this place for some of them has always been home. So we kind of treat it like an extension of our house, really. My son was actually training here as a priest, and we get our mokopuna to come here as often as we can, and it's good. It helps to create the sense of whānau in them.
Hone remembers a time when it wasn't so easy to intermarry in New Zealand.
You run into prejudice. One of the saddest moments in our marriage was that one of the priests that I deeply admired told me he wouldn't come to my wedding because I was marrying a Pākehā. I won't name him because I still love the man to this day, though he died. And it took a long time for me to get past that with him. My in-laws, they had their misgivings, and they had to overcome those, and I didn't help, of course, with my strongly belligerent manner. It wouldn't have mattered whether I was Māori or Pākehā. I think I would have got offside with my mother-in-law anyway. But we got past all that.
Hone says there's always discussion about how everyone turns out a different colour in the family.
When Nepi was born, he was very fair. And when Hirini was born, he was slightly darker. One tans easier than the other one just scorches. And he always looks at his mother and he says, "It's your fault, it's your silly Pākehā skin." Māoris would see this kid come along and grab hold of me and say, "Ha, who's that Pākehā kid hanging on to you?" I said, "Excuse me, that's my son." "Ah, te mahoki." I said, "But at least he's human." And we got used to it. We worked our way through that.
Jane is shy with cameras, but Hone says she's staunchly pro-Māori, and as a teacher has worked hard to see Māori children succeed and spoken out against racism. But sometimes their lives diverge.
One of the things we learned with each other was that there are no-go areas in both our lives. And some things I go to, she just instinctively says, "I won't come with you on this occasion." And there are some of her Pākehā things that she goes to that I say, "Oh, you're on your own here." We learn to read each other's communities and know where were the places we could go and where were the no-go places, which made for a much happier relationship.
Also in the mixed culture congregation are Charles and Linda Hirschfeld, members of the Ka whānau who were brought up very differently. The Hirschfelds, Charles, Carol and Linda, were raised from a more Pākehā perspective. Their mother, Ngāwiki, who died when they were young, had moved to Auckland to escape her life on the East Coast. Their father, Charles Sr., a Pākehā from Australia, was the major influence in their lives. Charles Sr. experienced culture shock when he visited Ngāwiki's family in Tolaga Bay just before his marriage in the 1950s. His wife's whānau were very poor.
We crossed a couple of fences and we found a little tin corrugated iron hut. So in this tin corrugated hut was the family. Now, I think we had to roost one of the kids out of the bed so that we had a bed to sleep on. One of the kids was in a cot that had been enlarged by tacking a banana crate, I think, to the end of it so that her feet would be long enough to share this cot. And the future father-in-law was sleeping in an upturned tank outside on a bed of bracken fern.
Charles also learnt about racism as Ngawiki's partner.
We went to a beer garden in Howick and they turfed us out. Did have a couple of landladies complaining, not about Ngawi, but about me, my behaviour, you know, but I mean, really that was, you know, that was the cover, you know.
Their son, Charles Jr., says he didn't feel complete and didn't know where he truly belonged until he decided in his 20s to find out about his mother's life on the East Coast.
And so I decided at the end of my studies at law school that I would travel there, and I did so. And that was a major journey into finding out what my identity was so far as the Māori side was concerned.
Charles says his Pākehā father has supported his need to understand both sides of his heritage.
He has known that I've always had an interest in looking into that much more than my sisters. For example, in terms of searching out the whakapapa, associating with people on the East Coast from where our people come from.
I think that we were aware that we were half-caste from the moment that we could think, basically. I think that it wasn't something that we discussed at home as such, but it became obvious through our contact with other kids that we were thought of as half-caste. And that made us different.
We were mainly in a Pākehā environment. There weren't that many Māori kids at our school, certainly not when we were at Epsom. I think there was one other Māori kid in the class.
Mum made a supreme effort to present us immaculately when we went out into the world. She would spend ages fine-combing our long dark hair so that it was absolutely perfectly in place. And I think that's because she didn't want anyone claiming that we were anything but, you know, clean and perfect.
I can remember when we lived in Epsom going to someone's place and the father saying, get them out of here, why did you bring them here? And I didn't know what he meant by that, but I felt really uncomfortable and I knew it had something to do with being brown.
Although they felt supported by their father in other ways, Carol and Linda felt he didn't understand when it came to racism.
I can remember going home and saying, somebody called me Black Sambo, and he just said, well, tell them to, you know, naff off or something.
He would just think,
oh, it's a bit of teasing or something.
Yeah, it was just a different kind of teasing, as opposed to this fundamental sense that you don't belong in certain situations. You are made to feel less because you're different. And, you know, because as far as Dad was concerned, we were the best things ever produced in New Zealand. And he made us never feel anything less than that.
Being made to feel less is a common experience for people of mixed heritage.
My first awareness of perhaps a complexity with my Māori background was I had a flat, I was 17, a job in a remote city, I was on my own. The landlady, I spoke with her one day and she said that she had all sorts of people occupying her buildings except Maoris. And I suddenly went through this moment in my head when I thought of what happens if my family comes to visit? What am I supposed to do then?
We only had Māori relations around the place, you know. And when we asked Mum, you know, what happened to her relations, well, you know, well, she just said she was disowned when she married Dad, you know. So we never had any contact with her side of the family. Never have. So the only relations we knew came and ate all our food and left us with nothing.
When we were on the marae, so well, she sings so well, that people ask, "Koe tēnā Māori?" Who's that Māori?
I just like singing waiata, and it's the normal thing to do in that context. So that's what I do, and it's being part of a Māori family.
Oral language, this is it, this is the only thing, this is what we agreed to, this is what we signed up for. They never forgot, and they handed on the meaning of this text through and through. So Māori never forgot, and it's said of us Pākehā that we never knew.
Pākehā misunderstanding about the dynamics of bicultural relationships is a topic that Moya Armstrong tackles in her treaty workshops.
Any sort of questions from that last bit?
Moya can share her own experiences of a cross-cultural marriage. For instance, she can't speak te reo Māori herself, but her 2 Māori children attend a kura kaupapa.
It's a very kind of frustrating exercise for me in a lot of ways because I can't help them with their homework, and I feel very much like perhaps that the Māori parents who were sending their children to Pākehā schools throughout our history would have felt that same sense of sort of distance between what their children were experiencing and what the reality was at home.
Deirdre Walker is typical of Pākehā who've embraced the Māori aspects of their partner's life. Being the wife of Ranginui Walker, an outspoken commentator on Māori issues, could have been challenging, but she's right behind everything he does.
I always say that the Māori sides put the jam on the bread and butter, made life interesting, that lots of other people...
Well, she goes to a lot of interesting huis. When I was chairman of the district council, she came to every meeting, every hui there was, and sat there and listened and never intervened. She just took a back seat. She knew that it's not her place as a Pākehā to contribute to the discussion, even though she might have made a valuable contribution.
But sometimes people would say, "Oh, we feel sorry for you listening to Pākehās being, abused." It doesn't matter to me.
She gets her say in a roundabout way in that she's highly informed on public affairs, reads everything that's available in the newspapers, in the magazines, in the Listener, and is totally briefed on what's going on in the world. And very often I'm interviewed on issues that I'm informed on, but occasionally I'm caught out. So I say to Deirdre, "Hey, brief me on this." And then I catch up, and then I stand up and do the interview for television or radio, whoever's calling at the time. And
sometimes if he's out and they ring up and I say, "Well, he's out, but I'll tell you what he'll say."
That's called partnership, see? Yeah.
The close Walker whānau is an expanding mixture of shades and cultures.
We've got an Irish son-in-law, we've got a Māori daughter-in-law, we've got a Thai daughter-in-law, we've got a Dutch second-generation granddaughter-in-law, the odd Pākehā ones.
The eldest of the Walker's children, Michael, met his Thai wife Ratana in Hawaii when they were both studying for their doctorates in the 1980s.
I said, "Oh, you know what, looking at that gorgeous looking guys there, he went out for runs and things like that with lots of curly hairs and under dark tall, sort of like brownies and things like that. So I wouldn't invite him out."
She's had a lot of shocks coming and living here, purely and simply because of the cultural differences. Both with Māori and with non-Māori society here in New Zealand. And so her first year was pretty unpleasant, actually, and that it can be very, very difficult to get established. And Ratna, fortunately, has proven to be very adaptable and flexible.
There's sometimes confusion for people meeting Michael and Ratana's children. Puna Hamua has an ancestral Māori name, but is usually mistaken for Chinese. And her sister Leilani has a Hawaiian name and an intriguing appearance.
That was the exact question I was asked by one of my long-time friends. I think she just came straight up to me and said, "What are you?" And, naturally that led into the full description. I'm half Asian, quarter European and quarter Māori. And that's generally what most of those kind of questions lead into, I guess.
Ranginui always says New Zealand race relations are being solved in the country's bedrooms.
I mean, mokopuna like ours are the future New Zealanders. They'll end up running this country.
The experiences of cross-cultural couples are often observed with humour by their children. Aroha Hathaway saw her Pākehā father make some big compromises.
With my 21st, my family came to stay. I don't know if they were invited or not, and they turned up, as they do, because we're Māori, you know, we had a big venue, so lucky. And my birthday was in November, and I don't think they left till March. Dad, it just did Dad's head in, you know. He's got 15 people living in his garage. They've built a sink, and they've got 3 TVs and 4 or 5 beds set up, and he'd say to Mum, I don't want them to go, I just want to know, do you know when or how or why? And Mum would just not speak about it for 4 weeks, and they'd be there for another 4 weeks and we'd still not know. I loved it. I had all my whānau around me, you know. My real whānau, you know, Mum's brothers and sisters' kids, so. But that's where sometimes, you know, it could be challenging.
This is their family marae where we all get together for special occasions.
Moana Maniapoto says her Pākehā mum, Bernie, defends Māori when she hears them criticised.
Good on ya, Mum. And here's the family line-up. Me, Trina, 3 sisters and 1 brother that aren't in the band. Everyone's a performer though, and you have to be around here. This is Nepia, our father. He'd rather play with his granddaughter than pose, though he did have his own band years ago. When my grandmother died, my Māori grandmother, my Mairo, died, and Mum said she can just remember, you know, being at home where my grandparents lived and just doing like endless dishes, just dishes, dishes, dishes. She said, they all came, all these Maoris, and they ate, and then they slept on the floor. And she said, I was just doing dishes all the time. And that was her kind of first, you know, little culture shock. Well, she's been doing dishes for blooming years since then and not a moan. She's pretty cool in our marae. She's like one of the stalwarts in the kitchen, which is, you know, that's quite an important thing when you're in a marae.
Cabinet Minister Wayne Mapp and his wife Denise Henare know what it's like when the political becomes the personal in a mixed marriage. Denise is a lawyer who represents iwi in negotiations and litigation with the Crown.
Being married to Denise, of course, I've had to understand, perhaps I hear a lot of other New Zealanders, the dynamic nature of New Zealand and its bicultural heritage. And, you know, even today when you say New Zealand is both bicultural and multicultural, that still annoys a lot of people, interestingly enough. They think, oh, we should just be multicultural, completely ignoring the role of tangata whenua.
But the couple admit to having a lot of arguments about politics.
Particularly issues that perhaps the National Party might have over time developed in terms of, say, the treaty and, of course, the Māori seats. I am on the Māori roll and have been on the Māori roll since the age of 18. Wayne has never had my vote. He's had a lot of support, but never my vote. And, of course, that's very important to me, being on the Māori roll.
Denise has disagreed with National's stance on the abolition of the Māori seats. She was uncomfortable with Don Brash's Orewa speech, and as a lawyer for Waikato, she objected to the fiscal envelope.
It was the result of a lot of thought and a lot of a sense of what is the scope of this exercise. And in political terms, it's always nice to get a nice round figure because people understand round figures. And so the $1 billion became kind of a facsimile for what seemed fair and reasonable.
And of course, I disagreed with it. It looked to us as though it was prejudging the outcome of the negotiations, so I disagreed with that.
At times, the bicultural experience cuts deeply.
When you're sitting at the table and you're the only Māori there and you're quite approachable, they'll ask you questions that they would never ask anybody else. Why do we have to have a Māori rugby team? Aren't the All Blacks enough?
One of my Pākehā grand aunts or great aunts, she had a funny little wee thing going on where she'd chop Dad out of the family photos. So there'd be Mum and all the relations standing there, and you know, her arm would be there, and there's like this elbow going through there, and that would be it. Ted disappeared off the face of the photographic whakapapa.
Mum would go to get the flat when they moved to Auckland, and then as soon as they saw it was a surname, tummy headed is gone, and all that sort of crap, you know. Banking issues in terms of trying to get credit when somebody she knows in the church, because she's a strong Catholic. Lots of other people in the church would be able to get credit facilities. We had great difficulty getting credit facilities because Māori father. And there was a apprehension at the time about, you know, a Pākehā woman marrying a Māori. You know, there was, and just the way it was in the 40s and 50s.
The greatest challenge for me in our mixed marriage has been with our children and the crisis of identity that they've all had to face at some stage. And I can remember Eddie saying that you have to make a choice, and in the end the choice has to be Māori.
Yes, I think our children and our mokos identify as Māori because they can't find the safety and surety in the Pākehā world that they do in the Māori world.
Suzanne Boys, now a master's student at Otago University, calls herself half-caste, and she decided to study what that means.
I had a conversation with some peers and we'd done a group assignment together about being half-caste and about being called a plastic Māori, something that had come up quite a bit, and that perhaps we weren't as authentic because we had Pākehā whakapapa as well. So that's sort of what got me thinking, and it made me wonder, well, where did these negative attitudes come from?
I've always been called the yellow Māori. I'm a lot yellower than my other Māori friends. They're kind of like a really nice dark chocolate colour, and I'm orange, like I've been coated with Thin Lizzy or something. There's been confusion around what and who I am.
One of the key things that I found was students that had been brought up in a really Māori environment hadn't had the same issues as those that had been through a really sort of Pākehā mainstream schooling and Pākehā environment. The ones that had grown up in a Pākehā environment had, been made to feel like they didn't fit in, whereas the Māori kids, they fit in with everyone.
One who's found her mixed heritage challenging is Margaret Kāwharu. She lives west of Auckland beside Rewiti Marae and is a treaty negotiator for Ngāti Whātua or Kaipara ki te Tonga.
This house, this whare tupuna, is called Rangiatea. It was built by my great-grandfather, Hauraki Paora.
The walls are rich with photographs of tupuna from her whakapapa. Margaret's grandfather, Wiremu Paora, married an English woman, Janet Anderson.
She raised me, and of course she raised my father.
Her father, Sir Hugh Kāwharu, married a Dutch woman called Hemina Schlepp, who returned to Holland when Margaret was 3, leaving her daughter to be raised in New Zealand. Because she's so fair, Margaret has spent most of her life explaining her blonde, blue-eyed appearance.
I tend to want a T-shirt that says, "This is just a cover-up." Because in fact, apart from my father's mother and my own mother, both of whom are not in New Zealand anymore, all my family in New Zealand are Māori. There is no other connection.
Margaret has felt a greater sense of belonging and purpose since she became involved in treaty claims for her iwi. But she still has difficult moments away from her own people, like a meeting she had recently with Māori from a funding organisation in Auckland.
And I could see it go right across their faces. Oh, who's this? And then we went into the meeting and they suggested that they do things properly by doing a mihi. And I actually disagreed with it because there were no kaumātua in the room and I was the only Ngāti Whātua in the room for the purpose of funding, and I thought it was a working meeting, and I said so. But these young Māori people thought it was more appropriate to begin with a mihi. So someone else stood up and did a mihi in the middle of Auckland to me.
One of the biggest things that I learned is that a half-caste really pushes the people's boundaries about the way they think about race. They blur the boundaries between the two. They don't fit a box, and that really confuses people, and they don't like it. So therefore they start to project negative attitudes towards them.
They ask you what percentage Māori you are. I don't know any other ethnic group in the world that gets asked to take their blood out of their veins, pour it into jars and measure how much is in each one.
Tainui Stevens, the child of a broken mixed marriage, says he was 50 before he felt really at peace with his identity and grateful for his life.
A great deal of my gratitude is because I had a sense of worth young. I started doing stuff young. That was in the Pākehā world. My father shot through the Māori parent when I was 11, and it's one of the saddest memories of my life, but a lot of people go through those difficulties. And my mother, the Pākehā parent, raised us with great sacrifice on her part, but well.
After living his Pākehā life, Tainui discovered his whānau when he was 17.
I ended up hitchhiking back to Ahipara to discover my family, my grandfather and things like that. Yeah, they called me their Pākehā mokopuna. In fact, I found myself very much a part of the family, bang, just like that. Being Māori made me feel human. It makes me feel a part of everything. My mountain saw me return back to Ahipara as a young man, looking for my roots and my grandfather. That same mountain saw me go back as a young parent to bury the afterbirth of my boy. It saw me come back to bury my boy. He died when he was 6, car accident in Sydney. And when he died, I found it really interesting that I couldn't use any other language to express my grief when he died. I'd only spoken Māori to him, and I could not utter English words at that tangi to let the pain and so forth out.
Tahu Pōtiki remembers the defining moment when he chose to identify as Māori.
When Dad dies, I'm only 17 years old, I've been away from home for 4 days. I'm in Te Kaihanga hostel, and it's our first hui, so there's 70, 80 Māori kids, all homesick, been away for 4 days. Dad, 2 fantails fly into the room. Someone walks in the room an hour later, I start howling. I know that Dad's passed away. Who should be in the hall with us is Joe Karatai and Ricky Ellison, both who are close relations to Dad, but are also sort of senior kaumātua up there in Christchurch. They start Whai Kōrero and Himene and every, so with this major sort of Māori moment with Dad passing away, which was just all, the circumstance, really. They have a major impact on how I've seen myself, they reinforce a whole bunch of stuff.
I'm Henewehi Mohi, and my mother is Kerry Lynch, and my father is Michael Rereo Mohi. Dad was really hard out working on the farm, and Mum was the mainstay, carer, and so we just grew up as basic Kiwi kids. And then when I was 10, Dad decided he wanted to learn Māori, so our household changed quite a bit. And Mum was a part of that and supporting him, I think. But I'm not sure if she was entirely comfortable with that transition, or that change in him when he suddenly had a very strong desire to learn Māori that meant that they kind of went in different directions, I think. And I guess was ultimately part of the reason that they separated a few years later.
Stacey and Scotty Morrison come from similar mixed backgrounds. Both were raised by Pākehā mothers who nurtured their Māori identity.
I think it's part of why we clicked is because we both have Pākehā mothers, and I think that there's things that are inherent in that mean that we have core values that are similar, and core experiences, which when you choose to start a family with someone, it's quite essential. I remember one of your friends saying that if it wasn't for your Pākehā mothers,
who knows where we'd be.
What do you mean by that exactly?
Well, I think our mum was like the rock. She was like she is the rock. She is the, we always talk about a pūtoko manua and the wharenui being the support pole that holds everything together and props up the wharenui. And if you take the pole out, the whole house falls down. And I think that's what our mother is in our family anyway. She's the pūtoko manua. And even though, we refer to males in Māori families supposedly meaning to have, a prominent role. I think, without our mum, our whare would have fallen over basically, and, that would have been detrimental to us in our upbringing and where we've got to now as children of our Māori father and Pākehā mother.
With different groups of friends, I'd behave in two different ways. With my Pākehā group of friends, I would perhaps not be as loud and out there as I normally am, but I wouldn't discuss anything Māori whatsoever. I would always talk about what they were talking about. And then with my Māori groups of friends, I would act in a completely different way as well. I even probably would change the way that I spoke, because using different language and things like that, talking about different types of things. So yeah, you can feel a little bit torn sometimes.
Once our children came along, well, my parents just fell in love with them, and the colour really didn't matter anymore. They just loved them as their grandchildren.
Yes, our children and our mokos belong to all cultures. They cover all the shades of the United Nations. But the main thing is that they identify as Māori.
Now, my dad was an international citizen, but when my brother came home to say that he was marrying this Pākehā lady, Dad nearly threw him and the table out the door, and then my mother, who, as all mothers are, the consoling factor in the house, took my brother and said, well, tell us about her. And then my father discovered she was a Roman Catholic and said, what, son? He said, not only is she a Pākehā, but she's a Roman Catholic Pākehā. And my brother and sister-in-law married, and we had to drag our father to the Catholic Church in Moerewa to the wedding. And like all of these interrelationships between cultures, when the first grandchild came along, that destroyed the veneer, I guess, that had grown up between my dad and my oldest brother and my sister-in-law.
Moya Armstrong tells her workshops that colour still matters in New Zealand, although it has a lot more subtleties in the 21st century.
At any one time, whether you're meeting a client for the first time or in whatever social situation, it's almost impossible now to make a judgment on the cultural identity of the person that you are meeting for the first time. Absolutely impossible.
People wanting to do kapahaka, but being told, oh, you're not Māori enough to do kapahaka. Or on the flip side of that, going to do an accounting degree and being told, oh, but you're Māori. What are you doing, with numbers?
I know I'm authentic. I know I'm Māori. I know I'm Ngaitahu. And it doesn't matter to me whether or not I'm light-skinned or not. Yeah. To me, it's not about appearance. It's about values and participation in your family and in your culture as well.
Professor Paul Spoonley has studied the new dimensions emerging in New Zealand society over the last 3 decades as cultures overlap. He says it's illustrated by Fred Graham's sculpture, Kaitiaki.
What we've done is recognise much more publicly what it means to be Māori, and we see that in the statistics, that people now identify much more readily as Māori. They assert their Māoriness in the public domains, and we, the rest of New Zealand, recognise that Māoriness.
Go.
Wairangi Kōpū and his wife Sarah are part of a movement that's trying to keep the Māori language alive. Even though Sarah's Pākehā and new to Te Reo Māori, she's learning the language for the sake of their son, Kaia, who hears only Māori from his papa.
Just helps them learn a little bit faster. So, from a parent's point of view, obviously invaluable, but as far as relationship goes, we don't really talk Māori to each other.
No, I actually feel a bit funny speaking Māori to him, but with Kai I'm fine, you know. But every now and then lately, I think.
Yeah, I've like, because I know now that she's starting to understand it. Like sometimes I'll think about saying things to her because I know that nobody else could really understand me.
E nui ana tāu mahi tohu, he pai ana koe I hua ki ngā mea katoa. He rungi a mātou tāu mana ki tanga kororia ki tō ingoa tapu. Āmene.
We meet here to recognise the beauty of love between these two people.
When Wai and Sarah married recently, their respective families took it all in their stride. Wai says his whānau had to get used to the idea that there was a limit on how many could attend the reception. Sarah's family enjoyed a new cultural experience when wedding speeches that followed the ceremony were each rounded off with waiata. The couple see it as the way culture in New Zealand is evolving. But Aroha Hathaway discovered that despite the changes, her son Tikiro can still feel pain when caught between two worlds.
His father's Pākehā and a police officer. And as a tūhoi child, he's been through some trauma because of that. He has watched his cousins on television being hauled out of cars. And I think for him it was quite difficult to reconcile the two. Because he loves his father and he's so proud of his father for being a police officer. And here was an entity treating his family and his tribe. This is a little boy trying to intellectualise it. And he found that very difficult.
I'm sometimes alarmed at how little Pākehā know about Māori things. And then I just have to, rejig my thinking because, I've actually been given quite an advantage to life in this country, having both sides firmly a part of my every essence. And so I think that sometimes it's frustrating, but I think that it just needs a little bit of patience and coercion and helping people to understand the Māori point of view.
When Māori look for Pākehā partners these days, they see a much wider range of Europeans to choose from. Rachel Paul chose Ferenc, who's from Hungary.
I did have great difficulty in finding a partner from either Māori or Pākehā because of the cultural baggage that comes with that. In meeting Ferenc or choosing Ferenc, he didn't come with any baggage like that.
And it's different in that her culture and my culture is the family size. My country looks like, first cousin and you cut off that in the family after it's too big, so it's not very close. But with her family, they can't think the fifth cousin or looks like that, and it's huge.
Their daughter, Keremaya, is a New Zealander of the future. She's trilingual. When she's not speaking Māori or English, she's watching cartoons in Hungarian with her father. Use of language has become an indicator of change in New Zealand society.
I know some Pākehā who will say, this is the whānau, and that includes Māori friends that have become very close to the family. So I think that, that concept has become sort of widely accepted in New Zealand.
Oh, it's changing. I mean, Pākehā kids are now doing the haka. Pākehā kids are now singing Māori waiata. Pākehā kids now quite proudly state that they belong to Aotearoa, which is 20 years ago, you would not have heard that. You hear it daily now. There are pockets where they still want to maintain their whiteness and their ethnic purity. Good on them. But the rest of New Zealand is gradually becoming much more sort of browned off. Or is it browned up?
One of these is a book of Beethoven sonatas that belonged to my grandfather, my Pākehā grandfather, my mother's side. And this humble tokotoko belonged to my Māori grandfather, and it came to me after he died. You know, these are just two taonga that are precious to me that reflect part of my background.
In the future, half-castes can really be the bridge between two societies. We have this ability to walk in both worlds. We have the ability to challenge people's stereotypes and perhaps even break them down.
Of course, intermarriage is not just about Māori and Pākehā anymore. There are two major new trends.
One is the arrival of the Pacific in New Zealand through the 60s and 70s, and already you're seeing that beginning to impact upon our culture, our music, our dress and so on. And then post-1990, the arrival of Asia. And of course Māori are intermarrying with those groups at quite significant rates.
I never really thought of my parents as being part Māori, part, you know, and the other one being part Chinese. They were just my parents, and you know, all the idiosyncrasies of their culture were just natural for us. So, naturally, I think that we probably did have a different lifestyle to a lot of other kids my age, but we just didn't take any notice of them.
I would say that you are probably part of the future face of New Zealand. Do you think of yourself that way?
A kind of mixed beige colour, yeah, I think so, maybe. That'd be nice.
He moto I ka urangi, noroto I te kopa, he tire area, he awe no te toroa. Rikurai, rikurai, ritorai.
Supporting local content so you can see more of New Zealand on air.